They thought destroying her luggage was funny, until they realized who Predator Shadow really was. She looked like just another traveler-worn boots, old army bag. But when airport security mocked her and tore through her things, they had no idea they were humiliating a decorated military veteran with one of the most feared call signs in Special Forces history. This isn't just about disrespect. It's about a woman who stayed silent for years until the truth brought the whole room to its knees. Drop a comment where are you watching from, and don't forget to subscribe. This story is just getting started. Sloane wasn't the kind of person who drew attention in a crowded airport. Dressed in a plain white tee and old jeans, she looked like any other traveler. But slung over her shoulder was a battered military duffel that had seen more than a few battles, and it was that bag that sparked the curiosity of the security team. Inside Terminal 6 of the Atlanta International Airport, 3 officers were in unusually high spirits. Officer Mason, the loudest of the bunch, smirked as he unzipped Sloane's bag. His colleagues, Officer Grace and Officer Ryan, chuckled as they saw the contents a pair of worn combat boots, a frayed military jacket, and a few faded patches with symbols they didn't recognize. "Looks like someone's a weekend warrior," Mason joked. "Loud enough for others in the line to hear." Sloane stood quietly beside the inspection table. Her posture was calm, but her eyes were locked on every movement, not with fear, but the steady focus of someone who'd been through far worse than TSA ridicule. None of them knew yet she wasn't just a traveler. She was the shadow in the storm, and mocking her would soon be their biggest mistake. The laughter was getting louder. Officer Grace pulled out a tattered piece of cloth from Sloane's bag, squinting at it. "What is this? Some Halloween costume?" she sneered, holding up the heavily patched combat jacket with 2 ripped sleeves and a faded unit insignia barely clinging to the shoulder. Ryan pointed to the back of the jacket, where the nickname Predator Shadow was embroidered in black thread. "Oh, we've got ourselves a real Rambo here," he chuckled, throwing it on the inspection table carelessly. Sloane remained still, her breathing calm, her hands loosely by her side. But in her eyes there was movement, not of fear, not of panic, but of calculation. She was scanning exits, evaluating angles, and watching their hands as if muscle memory had kicked in. Mason pulled out an old pair of dog tags and held them up. Sloane Vega, born in '83. "Dang, you're pushing 40. He smirked. "Shouldn't you be knitting or something instead of hauling army junk?" They laughed again, loud, disrespectful. That was when the temperature in the room shifted. A voice, firm and commanding, sliced through the air. "Stand down. Immediately." The officers turned. Behind them stood a man in full uniform, Lieutenant Colonel Matthew Brooks. His face was unreadable, his voice sharp as a whip. He didn't walk in. He marched, as though every step carried weight none of them understood. All 3 officers straightened. Mason tried to speak, but the colonel cut him off with a glare. He turned to Sloane. "Ma'am," he said with full respect, nodding slightly. "Welcome home?" Dead silence. Grace looked between them, confused. "Wait. You know her?" she asked. "Lieutenant!" Colonel Brooks turned to the team. His face hardened. "That woman is Lieutenant Commander Sloane Vega, call sign Predator Shadow. She led 3 Black Ops missions for joint special operations that none of you would even have clearance to know existed." Ryan blinked. "Wait. The Predator Shadow," he whispered. Brooks continued. "Her unit saved 27 hostages in the Korangal Valley without firing a single civilian-damaging shot. She was off the grid for over 18 months in Operation Black Flame. She's the reason you get to walk through this airport and laugh like fools." The room was frozen, the air thick with shame and disbelief. Mason tried to speak. "Sir, we didn't know." You didn't ask. Brooks snapped. You saw a woman with scars and old gear and you mocked her, like rookies. You embarrassed yourselves, this facility, and the country you claimed to serve. Sloane finally spoke just one sentence. Her voice was quiet, but razor sharp. Respect isn't something you give when it's easy. Then she picked up her jacket from the table, folded it with practiced precision, and slung the duffel back over her shoulder. Grace looked down at her hands. Her cheeks burned. Ryan couldn't meet Sloane's eyes. Mason stood frozen, gripping the dog tags like they were burning his fingers. Colonel Brooks turned to Sloane once more. I have orders to deliver a briefing tomorrow at Redstone Arsenal. If you're available, we'd be honored to have you back at command. Sloane didn't answer right away. She looked around at the three faces, no longer smug, no longer laughing. Then she nodded. Send me the coordinates, she said, turning and walking away, each step a quiet thunder of dignity. Behind her, no one spoke. Not even the security line dared to whisper. This was the moment everything shifted, not just for the officers, but for everyone who watched from the sidelines and realized some heroes walk among us in silence, and the weight they carry isn't for decoration. It's a shield they've earned, one scar at a time. 2 days later, deep within the fortified walls of Redstone Arsenal. Sloane stood in front of a secure operations screen, her arms crossed. Around her, a small group of elite officers and analysts gathered, including Colonel Brooks. No one said a word out of turn. The woman they once dismissed as an aging ex-soldier was now leading a mission briefing, and her presence commanded the room like a storm on the horizon. We have intel, Sloane began, her voice steady. That Operation Ember Wolf, the one we shut down 5 years ago, may have been reactivated. Satellite thermal signatures in Sector 9 matched the layout of a known insurgent training camp, one we thought was buried. A hush swept across the room. A young officer leaned forward. But Emberwolf was classified as neutralized. You led that final sweep? Sloane's jaw tightened. I did. But I never saw the bodies. I never saw the facility burn. Brooks interjected. So what are you saying? Someone covered it up? I'm saying, Sloane replied slowly, either we were lied to, or someone is using my own mission files to rebuild the operation from the inside. The room turned cold. Suddenly, the analyst at the back of the room gasped. Ma'am, we've got something. He turned his monitor. A drone feed zoomed into a remote outpost surrounded by rocky desert. Walking out of the shadows was a figure blurred but familiar. The room went silent as the image cleared. It was Commander Elias Kane Sloane's former unit partner, and according to all military records, he'd been declared KIA 4 years ago. Brooks whispered, That's not possible. But Sloane didn't flinch. Her voice dropped to a cold whisper. No. It's very possible. And if he's alive, that means someone wanted me out of the way. The weight of betrayal settled like lead across her chest. Elias hadn't just been a partner, he had been the only one who knew every detail of Operation Emberwolf. The encryption keys, the blackout codes, the exit tunnels. If he'd turned, he wasn't just a threat, he was a walking ghost with the power to burn every secure op she'd ever touched. One of the junior officers asked, Do we alert command? Sloane shook her head. No, not yet. I know Elias. If he knows I'm alive, he'll vanish before we can track him. She walked over to the map screen, tapped the route toward the base, and drew a line. I'm going in. Brooks stepped forward. Alone. Sloane nodded. This isn't just tactical. This is personal. He'll only come out of the shadows if he thinks I'm coming to finish what I started. There was a moment of resistance. But Brooks understood. No one else had walked through the ashes of Emberwolf. No one else had buried the names. No one else had lived with the ghosts. As the room dispersed and preparations began, Sloane stood for a moment by the door, staring at the drone still frame of Elias. He looked older, rougher. His face was different, colder, sharper, but his stance was the same. He stood with that slight tilt, one foot back, ready to draw, a soldier's stance, one she'd trained him into. She whispered to herself, "I carried your dog tags out of that hell, and now you wear betrayal like a uniform." Outside the base, the wind picked up over the hills. The mission ahead wasn't just dangerous, it was the kind you didn't return from twice. But Sloane Vega had already died once in the files of the U.S. government. This time, she was coming back not as a soldier, but as a reckoning. The desert air stung her face as Sloane crouched behind a crumbled stone wall overlooking the outpost. It had taken her 15 hours of off-grid movement to get here. No trackers, no radio, no backup. Just her instincts, the cold steel of her sidearm, and the ghost of a man she once trusted with her life. The compound looked dormant, almost abandoned, but that was how Elias operated. Silent, precise, invisible. He didn't build armies, he built illusions. Through her scope, she watched the perimeter. No guards, no movement, no alarms, just one door slightly open, like it was waiting for her. Sloane moved. She slipped through the sand like smoke, silent and invisible. Her boots made no sound, her breath shallow and controlled. Every movement calculated until she was inside the building. And there he was. Elias Kane sat calmly at a table in a dimly lit room, sipping from a tin cup. He looked older, thinner, but his eyes were sharp. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't stand. "I knew you'd come," he said, as if they were old friends meeting for coffee. Sloane didn't lower her weapon. "You were supposed to be dead." He smiled faintly. "And you were supposed to disappear." A beat of silence. "You betrayed your country," she said flatly. "No," he replied. "I refused to keep serving a lie." Sloane hesitated. "What lie?" Elias reached into a file folder on the table and slid it toward her. Slowly, carefully. She kept her weapon trained on him as she picked it up. Inside were images, documents, mission logs, but not faked. These were internal, redacted, high clearance level. She recognized the code markers immediately, and then she saw the date. It was from before Operation Emberwolf had begun. "What is this?" she asked. Elias's voice softened. They knew it was a civilian camp. They labeled it insurgent to justify a black ops test run. Your unit wasn't sent in to stop a threat, you were sent in to erase evidence. Her heart stopped. "No," she breathed. "You think I just walked away," Elias said. "I stayed behind to find the truth. And when I did, they buried me. You carried my dog tags thinking I was a casualty, but I was just discarded." Sloane's hand began to shake. Her team, her mission, the operation she believed saved lives, it had been a cover-up. She remembered the smoke, the screams, the moment the comms went dark. She thought it was chaos of war, but now it all twisted into something darker. "I watched you carry that guilt," Elias said. "I stayed silent because I thought maybe, if anyone could live with it, it would be you. But you were never supposed to find me again." Sloane lowered the file. Her mind raced. The medals, the silence, the unmarked debriefing rooms. It all made sense now. She had been used. The woman who had sacrificed her body, her name, her identity for what she believed was justice, had been nothing more than a tool in a political cleanup. "You came to kill me," Elias said quietly. "But maybe now, you'll help finish what we started. This isn't revenge." "Sloane, it's exposure." Sloane stared at the man across from her, She saw betrayal, but also pain. And in that moment, for the first time in years, she questioned everything she had fought for. "I'm not your ally," she said, "and I'm not your enemy." He nodded. "Fair enough. But you're the only one with the clearance and the credibility to burn them down." She turned to leave, her voice low and resolved. "If what you showed me is real, then the people who built the lie, they're going to regret underestimating the shadow they created." As she disappeared into the night, a shift had begun. Sloane Vega was no longer a soldier following orders. She was a woman unraveling the system from the inside. And this time, she wouldn't stop until the truth had a name and a cost. The next morning, a blacked-out SUV rolled into an old hangar in Nevada, far from any radar or satellite feed. Sloane stepped out first, her face stone-cold, but her eyes scanning every inch of the space. Inside, dim lights flickered over crates stamped with decommissioned, classified. Waiting for her was an old contact, Avery Tran, a former NSA data analyst turned whistleblower. Avery had a sharp mind and a sharper sense of justice, the kind of person who walked away from a six-figure salary to expose a surveillance ring targeting civilians. "I didn't think I'd ever see your name hit my terminal again," Avery said, arms crossed. "I need help digging through hell," Sloane replied, handing over Elias's file. "And you're the only one I trust not to sell it to the highest bidder." Avery flipped through the folder. Her brows furrowed deeper with every page. "Jesus, this isn't just dirty. This is scorched earth." Operation Emberwolf wasn't just a mistake, it was a system test. And there are more like it. Sloane already knew. But hearing it from someone who once sat behind the data walls made it real in a new, brutal way. "So, what's your plan?" Avery asked. Sloane looked around the hangar, where old gear and decrypted comm units lay like relics. "I'm going to leak this, but not through the press. Not through Congress. I'm going to the families of the people we accidentally neutralized. And I'll let them decide what justice looks like." Avery whistled. "You're talking full exposure. No protection. No shield." "I spent too long hiding behind operations and silence," Sloane said. "If I vanish, let them find out why. But if I speak loud enough first, maybe I won't be the only one they try to silence." They began setting up a mobile command unit right there in the hangar laptops. Signal blockers, satellite taps, within hours. Sloane was staring at hundreds of encrypted files from her own missions, many of them altered, others completely erased. Then they found it. A document buried in the metadata Op Ember Wolf. Prototype template. Redeploy. Authorized VP. Top tier. Avery's eyes widened. This wasn't a one-time cover-up. This was a scalable black site blueprint. They planned to use it again under different names, in different countries. Sloane's jaw clenched. The betrayal reached higher than she imagined. Just then, her satellite phone buzzed. "Unlisted number. No caller ID." She answered but said nothing. A male voice spoke on the other end. Calm. Controlled. "You've been very busy. Lieutenant Commander Vega." Sloane didn't respond. The voice continued. "This operation was never about you. It was about maintaining global stability." "You mean erasing the truth before anyone asks questions?" she snapped. "You're not thinking clearly," the voice said. "You're a decorated officer with more classified kills than any man in your unit. We gave you a legacy. Don't destroy it." Sloane laughed bitterly. "You didn't give me anything. I bled for it. You walk away now, and no one gets hurt. Keep pushing, and your story ends with a bullet no one sees coming." She hung up. Avery looked over. "They're watching." "Let them," Sloane replied. "Let them feel what it's like when their creation refuses to be controlled." By sundown, Sloane stood in front of a small camera rig. She wore her old jacket, the one they mocked at the airport, with her nameplate visible and her face bare. No makeup, No rank, just truth. She pressed record. My name is Sloan Vega. I served 19 years in classified operations. I believed I was serving my country. I believed we were protecting people. But I was wrong. She paused, her voice heavy but unwavering. I've uncovered evidence of intentional targeting of civilians, falsified mission reports, and internal clearance abuse that cost innocent lives. I am no longer willing to carry this alone. If you see this, it means they're trying to silence me. Don't let them. She uploaded the video to 4 encrypted servers, set on a timed release. Then she looked at Avery. Now we wait. But both of them knew this wasn't the end. This was the beginning of a war not fought with weapons, but with truth, exposure, and a fire that couldn't be silenced. For the first time in years, Sloan Vega wasn't hiding behind orders, code names, or silence. She was standing in her own name, with nothing to shield her but the raw, unfiltered truth. And it was terrifying. The message she had recorded spread faster than anyone anticipated. Within 24 hours, underground forums lit up, encrypted shares went viral, and independent journalists began threading together pieces of a puzzle the government had buried for over a decade. Some called her a traitor, others called her a hero. But for the first time, she didn't care. Because now, she wasn't defined by her kill count, her missions, or the number of nights she spent sleeping with one eye open. She was defined by something far more dangerous: accountability. Inside the Nevada hangar, the silence was thick. Avery stared at the screen as the video passed 1 million decentralized views. You know they'll label you unstable, she said quietly. They already did, Sloan replied. Back when I started asking questions. She walked to the far corner of the room where her old combat boots lay, the same pair the TSA agents laughed at. She picked them up, studied the worn soles, the frayed stitching, the dried sand still clinging to the creases. Each scuff held a memory, each crease a moment of survival. And yet for so long, she'd let those boots speak louder than her voice. But not anymore. I used to think being strong meant staying quiet, she said, following orders, bearing weight no one else wanted to carry. But strength without truth is just controlled weakness. Avery turned to her. What changed? Sloan hesitated. I did. She remembered the girl who first enlisted, bright-eyed, idealistic, desperate to make her late father proud. A war veteran himself, he'd told her once. You don't need a weapon to be dangerous, just a reason strong enough to stand for. For years, her reason was duty. Then it became survival. Now, it was justice, and it burned hotter than any war zone she'd ever stepped into. Sloan sat down, staring at a wall of pinned documents, maps, red lines, photographs, a chaotic puzzle that now made more sense than the world she once believed in. Every piece told a different story. Every lie exposed a different wound. But she didn't break. She began to rise. Calls started coming in. A woman from West Virginia, whose brother had disappeared after a black site mission. A retired Marine whose unit was ordered to hold perimeter while something off the books went down. Even an old chaplain, now in hospice, sent a handwritten letter confessing to a cover-up he'd overheard during confession, dated the same week Ember Wolf went live. The stories were different, but the pain was the same. They were lied to, used, discarded, and now, because one woman dared to speak, they were finding the courage to remember, to speak, to fight. Sloan didn't expect redemption. She wasn't interested in glory. But she did want something she'd lost along the way. Peace not the kind found in silence, but the kind earned through fire. One night, while staring at an old mission photo, she whispered aloud, I forgive you, Elias, not because he deserved it, but because she did. Carrying his betrayal had poisoned her thoughts for years, and now she was letting go not to forget, but to move forward, unshackled. She folded the photo and placed it into a box labeled Truth. Inside were all the documents, files, and memories she once feared to face. Now, they were just part of the path she had survived. "I used to be the shadow," she told Avery one evening, "but shadows hide in silence, and I'm done hiding." Avery smiled, almost tearfully. "You're not the shadow anymore, Sloane. You're the storm." And she was a storm born of betrayal and rebuilt in truth, a soldier forged by war, but transformed by conscience, a woman who had finally stopped carrying ghosts because now she carried purpose. 3 weeks later, Washington, D.C. was burning not with fire, but with questions. Committees were scrambling, classified files were being re-examined, retired officials were suddenly unavailable for comment. The quiet corners of the intelligence world were filled with noise, all because of one woman who refused to die quietly. Sloane Vega's video had triggered a digital uprising. Thousands of veterans came forward, each with stories that painted the same chilling picture: missions erased, lives lost without record, truths buried under layers of bureaucracy and silence. What started as a whisper had become a war cry. On the steps of a memorial wall, one with no names, only numbers, stood a crowd that hadn't gathered in years. Not reporters, not politicians, but people. Real people. Families of the disappeared. Soldiers once sworn to secrecy. Medics, mechanics, even cooks who saw things they were told to forget. And there, standing quietly among them, wearing her worn-out combat boots and frayed jacket, was Sloane. No press, no speeches, just presence. A small boy tugged on her sleeve. His mother knelt beside him, teary-eyed. "He wanted to thank you," she said, "for saying what no one else would." Sloane knelt to the boy's level. "You be braver than I was when I was your age." "Okay." He nodded solemnly. Behind them, a new plaque had been added to the wall, unofficial, hand-carved, but powerful. It read, "For the unnamed, the unheard, the unseen." Brought to light by Satfoy. Back at the Nevada hangar, now retrofitted as a secure safe house for whistleblowers and independent investigators. Avery watched the feed roll in. Over 300 cases had been opened for reinvestigation. Sloane walked in holding a box, the same one labeled Truth, but this time it was sealed shut. "I'm not carrying this anymore," she said, placing it on a high shelf. Avery raised an eyebrow. "So what now, you done?" Sloane shook her head with a faint smile. "No, but I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm living." In the months that followed, Sloane used her voice to testify not in courtrooms filled with politicians, but in community halls filled with people who mattered. She taught classes on ethical operations. She consulted on reform. She became what the system feared the most, a warrior with a conscience. But perhaps the most powerful moment came when the same TSA officer, Officer Mason, walked quietly into one of her public talks. He stood in the back, head lowered. After the session, he approached her. "I was wrong," he said softly. "About you. About everything." Sloane didn't respond with anger. She just nodded. "Then make sure you're never wrong about the next person who doesn't look the part." He nodded back, eyes glassy. "Yes, ma'am." Later that evening, Sloane sat beneath a quiet desert sky, the stars blinking back at her like old friends. She thought about Elias, about the choices he made, about the choices she'd made to correct them. He had given up hope. She had chosen to build something from the ashes. And for the first time in decades, Sloane Vega wasn't haunted. She was whole. Not because she'd forgotten, but because she remembered everything and decided that the truth was worth the pain. She sipped her coffee, staring into the horizon. The war hadn't ended, but her war had changed. It was no longer about survival. It was about legacy. Silence may protect you, but truth will set others free. Sloane Vega's journey reminds us that the hardest battles are often the ones fought without bullets, the ones inside us. She spent years hiding behind orders, letting fear and duty dictate her every move. But when she chose to speak out, not only did she reclaim her voice, she gave others permission to do the same. Her story teaches us that real strength isn't measured by rank, medals, or missions. It's measured by our willingness to stand alone in the face of overwhelming power and speak the truth anyway. In the end, Sloane didn't just fight against a corrupt system, she fought for those who never got the chance. And through her, their stories were finally heard. If this story meant something to you, don't leave quietly. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Thanks for watching. See you in the next story.